All ladies and gents, this is Napoleon's retreat from Moscow, 1812. Last time we saw Moscow's battle at Berezina. It was one of the most bloodiest battles of Napoleonic wars. Napoleon chose to go against Russian head-on, so he and even Russians suffered great losses. It was in thousands. Napoleon chose to reserve his, royal guards or whatever, and I think that was a smart choice because he was way far away from his, France, his country. And if you had put all his men on the line, and if they were all defeated or killed, it would be impossible for him to retreat on his own all the way to France. It would have been ridiculous. So that was kind of a smart move. But Napoleon won in the end and reached Moscow. So let's see why he has to retreat from Moscow now.
Russia, 1812. Napoleon invades his former ally with the largest army Europe has ever seen. But for the French Emperor, the decisive blow remains frustratingly beyond reach. Russia's resilience is unlike anything he's ever encountered. And as winter closes in, his army begins the most infamous retreat in history.
Winter is going to be favoring Russians.
The 15th of September, 1812. 83 days after invading Russia, a week after his costly victory at Berezina, Napoleon entered Moscow. He expected to be greeted by dignitaries, formally offering the city's surrender. Instead, he discovered that 90% of Moscow's inhabitants had fled. A fire had started the previous night and was blamed on drunken soldiers.
Nah, I think
but
that was
over
deliberate.
the next 48 hours, fires continued to break out across Moscow.
That is
until
deliberate.
most of the city was ablaze.
Foul
Count
plays at hand.
Fyodor Rostopchin, the city's governor, had ordered that Moscow be destroyed rather than allowed to fall into enemy hands.
Man, when you think about it, it's really stone cold what the Russians are doing here. Moscow is their prize city, alright? It's the capital. And, look at all the architecture, the culture the city has, the history. So when somebody takes some prized possession like that, what normal people thinks that we are going to take it back and things like that. But Russian here, we are not going to give Napoleon the pleasure and going to destroy everything that is our prized possession. All this architectural buildings you're seeing, we're going to destroy all of it because you know what, we'll build it again. That's really stone cold, man.
And now fires were being started deliberately by Russian criminals, freed from jail and acting on police orders. French soldiers rounded up and shot any they could catch. But the inferno was impossible to contain. In 4 days, 2/3 of Moscow was destroyed.
God damn.
With the fires finally under control, Napoleon's soldiers turned their attention to systematically looting the ruined city. While from his new quarters in the Kremlin, Napoleon sent a letter to Emperor Alexander in St. Petersburg, inviting him to make peace and end the war. He received no reply.
You know what I think? Napoleon just realized that this got too serious. If they decided to destroy Moscow rather than giving to me, I might be in some serious issue here. I'm facing people that are really going hardcore. He realized that, so that's why he's reaching Alexander to tell him to surrender, because he doesn't want to go through with all the fighting.
Napoleon waited, confident that Alexander would eventually negotiate. But as the days passed, he grew increasingly uneasy. Cossack raids were disrupting his vital communications with Paris, as well as the arrival of supplies.
That is going to be an issue. That is going to be a real issue, because look at it. How far away he's from the France. And he's way inside Russia. That's a massive, massive distance. So his supply lines are going to be constantly destroyed by the Russians, and even in places like this by guerrilla warfare. So it's going to be really hard to get support. He's really deep inside.
Steady attrition of French forces and Russian reinforcements meant Napoleon was outnumbered for the first time in the campaign. Rumours also reached him that his reluctant allies, Prussia and Austria, were in secret talks with his enemies.
Yeah, that is what happened when you take everything by force. Napoleon take everything by force, and then they become allied because they had to. But they are not really allies, are they? They just had to become allies. They were waiting for the right moment. And I think Prussia and Austria, they were, realized that Russia is the last threshold. Napoleon is hitting Russia, and this is the time to stab him in the back, because if not now, then when? So right now he's way far away from France. He's all the way to Moscow, and if Prussia and Austria both stabs him in the back and sides with Russia, they basically trapped him. Going back is going to be a challenge. So this was bound to happen.
Napoleon had proposed that the army winter in Moscow, but that now looked too dangerous. Reluctantly, he accepted that the army would have to move back to Smolensk to find safe winter quarters. Napoleon knew how severe Russian...
Oh God, so what? Destroying Moscow was for nothing? They should have just waited it out for Napoleon to go back. Because winter was coming anyway.
Winters could be, but continued to put off his departure, reassured by fine October weather, and hoping that at the last minute there might be a message from Alexander offering peace. It never came. On the 13th of October, the first light snow fell. 5 days later, Kutuzov launched a surprise attack on Murat's advance guard at Vinkovo and defeated it. Napoleon, stung into action, gave the order for the army to leave Moscow the next day. Our video sponsor, the legendary World of Tanks, is the home of online multiplayer armoured mayhem. This game has more than 550 carefully researched historic tanks, all of which can be blown to pieces across 40 stunning but highly lethal battlefields. World of Tanks is offering new recruits who use the link in our video description and the code TANKTASTIC a sign-up bonus of a premium light tank, 500 gold and 7 days premium access. A handy head start as you enter the fray and figure out your own tactical style. Fearless kamikaze assault or ice-cold hull-down sniper. Thank you to World of Tanks for supporting this video.
Yeah. Now is the moment my campaign begins. Emperor Alexander of Russia. I knew this was coming because, you know what? Whether it's world wars or Napoleonic wars, Russia's advantage is always their winter, conditions. Always is their, terrain, weather, and always the winters are always the issue. Opposing army always, struggles in that, and Russians thrive. So I think Alexander was waiting for winter to come so he can trap Napoleon. I haven't seen the video, but I'm going to think they are going to try to cut off his retreat, cut off that path and try to, trap him in the winter. Because Russians are going to be extremely good in winter against Napoleons, because let's be honest, French are not really good at staying in winter like the Russians are. So I feel like they were waiting for this to happen. This is why he said, now is the moment my campaign begins, Emperor Alexander. This is really calculated.
"100,000 men of the Grande Armée left Moscow in a column 10 miles long, with an estimated 40,000 carriages and carts. There were women and children too, army wives and the vivandières, the women who cooked for the soldiers, as well as some civilians. Every wagon and pack was stuffed with as much food and loot as possible. As he set off, Sergeant Bourgogne of the Imperial Guard made an inventory of his pack. It contained several pounds of sugar, some rice, some biscuit, half a bottle of liqueur, a woman's Chinese silk dress embroidered in gold and silver, several gold and silver ornaments, amongst them a piece of the cross of Ivan the Great. Besides these, I had my uniform, a woman's large riding cloak, 2 silver pictures in relief, 12 inches long and 8 high, all in the finest workmanship. Also several lockets and a Russian prince's spittoon set with precious stones. I wore over my shirt a yellow silk waistcoat, which I had made myself out of a woman's skirt. Over that, a large cape lined with ermine and a large pouch, hung at my side by a silver cord. This was full of various things, amongst them a crucifix in gold and silver and a little Chinese porcelain vase. Then there were my firearms, powder flask, and 60 cartridges in the box.
So they are retreating because winter is coming. They're just taking all the essentials, and he's like, I'm gonna take all the jewelry, apparently women's clothing for some reason. That's not essentials. What the hell is he doing, Ben?
This heavily encumbered army did not yet realize it was in a race against time.
Exactly.
The Russians were beginning to move against the flanks of Napoleon's 550-mile deep salient.
They're going to try and trap him.
Wittgenstein's army was driving back Marshal Saint-Cyr's outnumbered force at Polotsk and drawing Victor's 9th Corps west to support them. In the south, Admiral Chichagov's advance had Schwarzenberg's Austrian Corps falling back to cover Warsaw. The corridor was closing. And then there was the weather. Though Napoleon was confident his army could reach winter quarters in Smolensk in 20 days, well before the more extreme temperatures were due to hit. Napoleon planned to withdraw via Kaluga, through unspoilt country where the army could forage for supplies. But Kutuzov sent General Dokhturov's 6th Corps to block the road at Maloyaroslavets. In fierce fighting, Italian troops of Eugene's 4th Corps drove the Russians out of the town. It was a hard-won victory, reminiscent of the fighting at Borodino. Kutuzov now stood between Napoleon and Kaluga. Napoleon now took the unusual step of conferring with his marshals. And after discussing various options, he decided that rather than seek another major battle, they would retreat the way they'd come, along the Smolensk.
That's what his people need. For him to do something unusual, so they get scared. At the time that they are desperate, winter is coming, everybody like, what, we have to retreat. And at that time, Napoleon is like, what, come here, we're gonna talk this through. That's gonna, increase confidence in him. That will not make people all, jittery and scared.
Road. Napoleon had hoped to avoid this route, as it meant marching back through country already stripped bare of supplies. The day after the fighting at Maloyaroslavets, Napoleon was nearly captured by a group of Cossacks, and saved only by General Rapp's charge at the head of his escort. After this close shave, Napoleon had a phial of poison made up, which he carried around his neck in case of capture.
This is not looking good. Ooh.
Napoleon's army set off on its new course, shadowed at a respectful distance by Kutuzov's army to the south. They passed the old battlefield of Borodino, a grisly, unnerving sight.
Oh
where
god.
crows pecked at half-buried corpses.
Oh my god, that's just so effed up. It's not even funny, man. It's so ridiculous. Imagine one of the most bloodiest battle that you ever been through. Now you have to go through that again. You arrive there and you see just pile of dead bodies, crows everywhere. Ah, that is so grim sight. It's so ridiculous. All the smell and stench coming from all the dead bodies is just... I can't even visualize how horrible it would be, man. And they have to pass through that.
Relentless marching quickly began to tire out men and horses. A few days later, the temperature fell below freezing.
Damn.
The army's overworked, starving horses died en masse. Discipline began to break down, as some drivers simply dumped the sick and wounded by the roadside to try to ensure their own survival. As the French column became increasingly strung out, General Miloradovich, commanding Kutuzov's advance guard, fell on Davout's rear guard outside Vyazma. For a few hours, Davout's first corps was cut off, until Eugène and Ney came to...
My god, this battle is ridiculous. It feels like one of those, horror movie, the Pitch Dark or whatever that, Riddick movie was, Vin Diesel's, and every other those, survival horror type of things, where these monsters come out at night and they have to survive and go back to some, safe house or something. They run, they get cut off. Some of them gets killed. There is a hysteria in the air. People are frightened. Slowly everybody starts to die off one by one. Feels like that. Napoleon is there now. He has to retreat back because winter is coming. Russians thrive in winter, so they don't care much. Now Napoleon's army is going back, slowly retreating. The Kutuzov cuts off that retreat, so he has to go around again. And again the Russians army are keep cutting off Davout and just one by one taking them off. It's taking time. French are dying because it's getting below freezing, -2 or some degrees. This feels like one of those horror movies, and Russians are picking off French one by one, man.
To his rescue. The battle ended with street fighting in Vyazma as the French hastily evacuated the burning town. For the soldiers of the Grande Armée, so unaccustomed to retreats and routes, Vyazma was an alarming, demoralizing blow.
Yeah. I was suffering exceeded imagination. I don't think Napoleon's army ever been into position like this where they feel so defenseless. Just because of the weather. Doesn't matter how powerful their army is, they can't survive. It's because the winter is here. And they're just running and Russians are taking them off one by one. He was, even with the all bloodiest battle, he was still winning and took Moscow. And winter comes and he has to run back and Russians are taking them off one by one.
On the 4th of November, it began to snow heavily. The next night, temperatures plummeted to -20 degrees centigrade. Few men or women had proper winter clothing or access to shelter.
Oh my god.
Many froze to death overnight.
They come so unprepared, man.
The next morning, wagons and guns were abandoned.
What did Napoleon
Many
thought?
soldiers sought to save
I don't
themselves.
understand. When he invaded Russia, what did he thought, that he's gonna take over entire Russia before winter comes or something? Or he thought that Alexander would give up before winter comes? Because this is ridiculous. They had no preparation for winter.
Ignoring officers, stealing horses and food, and leaving the column to scour the countryside for supplies. Many of these foragers were found by the Cossacks. Some cut down or lanced, others robbed of every possession and left to freeze. In a few cases, they were handed over to peasants, eager for retribution against the foreign invaders who had plundered all they owned. As the army struggled on towards Smolensk through blizzards, Napoleon ordered Eugene's 4th Corps to strike out for Vitebsk, where there were large French supply depots. But Vitebsk had already fallen to the Russians.
Damn.
4th Corps was too weak to fight its way through and rejoined the army.
Why do I feel like that, they were, as soon as Napoleon invaded Russia, Russians were preparing for this. Alexander was preparing for this from St. Petersburg. Borodino, Napoleon won, he took over Moscow, and they gave up Moscow, they just left Moscow. I think at the time they thought that I don't care if we lose Moscow, the plan is set. Let the winter come, and everything is up to plan. As soon as winter come, they are like, just attacked everywhere, started to take over things. Took over that, French, depot where the things were stored before Napoleon could ever reach there. So I think Alexander was preparing for this. That's why they gave up Moscow so fast. They knew there's no point of losing people right now. Our time is at the winter. This is so calculated, man.
Army, minus its artillery and most of its baggage. A colonel who saw 4th Corps at this stage described men without shoes, almost without clothes, exhausted and famished, sitting on their packs, sleeping on their knees, and only rousing themselves out of this stupor to grill slices of horse meat or melt bits of ice.
God.
Just 3 weeks after leaving Moscow, a third of the army was dead or captured. About half the rest formed a growing army of stragglers, men without units, prepared to fight only to survive. Napoleon reached Smolensk on the 9th of November. The first troops into town ransacked the supply depots, leaving nothing for those who followed, including Ney's rearguard, which arrived 6 days later. Napoleon had hoped to make Smolensk his winter base, but the state of the army and lack of supplies meant the retreat had to continue. But the
he thought first that he had 100,000 people on his army, and he thought, we are going to seize Smolensk, wait out winter or something, then attack again. But he didn't realize that Alexander was waiting for this moment, and they just ransacked in the winter. France lost so many people that I think when he reached Smolensk, he's like, looked at his army, it's like, this is no army, nothing. So I think he's going to, try to retreat all the way back out of Russia. This is so devastating, man. I've never seen something like this. He was winning. It was bloody, but still winning. And of all the Napoleonic war battles, Russian prepared for this, and the winter came. It's just massacre, hysteria everywhere. People are struggling to survive. This is like a horror movie, man.
Days he spent there gave Kutuzov time to circle ahead
and
prepare an ambush.
See, in this graph, the way he is, making this graph, his, portrait or whatever here. Whenever, the story continues, then the Kutuzov came. It's like he's the main enemy of a horror movie, the main monster of a horror movie. He always comes up and, screws Napoleon in some way. This is ridiculous. First he blocked his, retreat, so he had to turn around, and that cost so much time. The winter came by then, and lots of his people die by just freezing. And now he's here, and, Kutuzov is still doing things like this. This is ridiculous, man.
When the French retreat resumed, he struck 30 miles west of Smolensk at Krasny.
Kutuzov was surprised, remember me?
Desperate fighting through knee-deep snow, Napoleon used his imperial guard to hold open the road, as Eugene and Davout's corps fought their way through the ambush with heavy losses. 2 regiments of the Young Guard were ordered to make a sacrificial counterattack to keep the Russians at bay, and were virtually annihilated. Kutuzov held back many of his troops and was blamed for not trying to destroy Napoleon's army when he had the chance. It's possible he was concerned at the number of raw conscripts in his own army, also suffering terribly in the freezing conditions. Not every French corps broke through at Krasny. Marshal Ney and his 6,000-strong rearguard arrived on the 18th of November to find the road blocked by 60,000 Russian troops.
Oh God, he's
no
done.
sign of the promised support from Davout.
Oh God, he's so done. 6,000 against 60,000, and even in that 60,000 Russians who's probably fine in winter. I mean, of course, nobody's fine in winter, but they're gonna be more than fine enough, because winter they're gonna get trouble in the winter, but they are accustomed to it. French can't be in a winter, because France, let's be honest, it's not really that cold compared to Russia. So they are literally going to freeze to death. But Russians, even though lots of people will die, they will persevere. And Russians are 60,000, while French is just 6,000. He's done, man.
First Corps. Ney's men hurled themselves against the Russian lines with desperate courage, but were mown down.
Yeah, I knew that.
Rejecting several invitations to surrender, Ney led the survivors in a daring night crossing of the Dnieper River, then across 45 miles of open country under constant attack from Platov's Cossacks to reach Orsha.
Damn, he did do that.
By the time Ney rejoined the army, his rearguard was down to just 800 fighting men, leading a column of several thousand stragglers.
God damn, that's
the army
way
regarded
big a
his
loss.
escape as a miracle, and when Napoleon heard of it, he immediately dubbed Marshal Ney the bravest of the brave.
Yeah, seriously though, I thought that's not going to happen, he's gonna die, but he did do it. This is beginning to be very serious. Now he thinks that.
Napoleon had escaped one trap, but now 3 Russian armies were closing in from different directions.
Look at that, Kutuzov again tried to block him.
Nearly 3-1. From the east, Kutuzov's main army with 65,000 men. From the north, Wittgenstein with 30,000, steadily driving back Marshal Victor's 9th Corps. And from the south, Admiral Chichagov's army of Moldavia with 34,000, having detached General Ostensaken with 30,000 to prevent Schwarzenberg's Austrians and Reynier's Saxon Corps marching to Napoleon's aid. Napoleon was heading for Minsk, a major French supply base with vast stores of the food, clothing, shoes and ammunition that his army so desperately needed. But on the 21st of November, disastrous news arrived. Minsk had fallen to Chichagov. He'd then marched on Borisov, driven out the Polish garrison, and captured its bridge over the Berezina river. By rights, the Berezina...
See, that's one of the key points, that, you know, Russians also move faster in winter. You can clearly see that Napoleon is really slowly moving in the winter, while Russian just, you know, walks through it because they are so accustomed to it. Kutuzov keep, you know, overtaking Napoleon and blocking him over and over again. That other guy reached so fast and took all those places before Napoleon can even come close to it. This is really horrible, man. Napoleon should have seen this coming. Then in winter, I'm gonna be screwed.
To a frozen solid by now, so Napoleon could have crossed.
But I think what happened was he started with so many people, like 500,000 I think he started with, while he invaded Russia, that he thought, doesn't matter winter or whatever comes, I'm going to be so overpowering that it's not going to matter. But by the time he reached the Borodino, more than half of them were already dead. And Borodino killed a lot of them.
But that a sudden thaw had turned the river into a torrent of ice and freezing water. Napoleon was at least joined by the hard-fighting Marshal Oudinot and his Second Corps, which hadn't suffered as badly as the main column on its retreat from Polotsk. Oudinot launched an immediate counter-attack on Borisov and retook the town, but couldn't stop the Russians burning the bridge.
Damn, okay.
With no other bridge for miles in either direction, it seemed Napoleon's exhausted army was finally doomed. But there was one sliver of hope. Polish cavalry had found a ford across the river near the village of Studienka. Napoleon issued a flurry of orders. Second Corps was to fake preparations for a river crossing south of Borisov. Victor's 9th Corps, arriving from the north, was to form a rear guard east of Studienka to hold the Russians at bay, while engineers worked as quickly as possible to build pontoon bridges across the river and win Napoleon's army a fighting chance of escape.
Now he's acting like Napoleon, doing fake things to deceive enemy and things.
On the afternoon of the 25th of November, General Eblé's Dutch engineers began building two 300-foot pontoon bridges across the Berezina river. They worked day and night, sometimes chest-deep in freezing water, and completed both bridges.
I'm baffled by this. Every time they build pontoon bridges in like a day or two for the massive army, it's just, I'm like, damn. The level of commitment and, you know, the work hour goes into that. It's just, you know, let's build it, we have to hurry. And especially now, in the freezing temperature, they are in the, you know, water, building these bridges. It's just like ridiculous. Think of the state of mind when they're doing that. But knowing that entire Napoleon's army is dependent on that would give them all the strength.
In less than 24 hours. Few of the engineers survived the ordeal.
Entire France was
Chichagov had
dependent
been
on that.
totally fooled by the diversion south of Borisov, and was moving his troops south to face it, allowing Napoleon's army to begin crossing its rickety bridges virtually unopposed. Oudinot's Second Corps led the way to secure a bridgehead, followed the next day by the remnants of the main army. Priority was given to formed troops, still able to fight. For the time being, the army's vast crowd of stragglers remained on the far bank. By the time Chichagov realized his mistake and began moving north, Napoleon had troops in place to defend the crossing. On the east bank, General Partonneux's 12th Division, 4,000 relatively fresh troops from Victor's 9th Corps, formed the rearguard. As Platov's Cossacks approached from the east, the vanguard of Kutuzov's main army, Partonneux tried to rejoin 9th Corps. But caught in a swirling blizzard, with visibility down to 50 meters, he marched straight into Wittgenstein's army.
That's nothing, 15 meters.
His entire division was killed or captured. Down to 50 meters,
50
he marched
meters.
straight into Wittgenstein's army. His entire division was killed or captured. The next morning, Chichagov and Wittgenstein launched coordinated attacks on both sides of the river. There was desperate fighting on the west bank, where Marshal Oudinot was, yet again, seriously wounded, but his Swiss infantry held the line, until General Doumerc's cuirassiers, the army's last heavy cavalry, charged and routed the Russians. At great cost, Polish and German troops of Victor's rearguard held off the Russians until dark, then pulled back across the bridges. For 2 nights, officers had been trying to get the vast camp of stragglers to cross the bridges when they weren't being used. But with temperatures reaching -30 centigrade, they'd preferred to stay put, huddled around their bridges when they weren't being used. But with temperatures reaching -30 centigrade, they'd preferred to stay.
Did you just say -30 centigrade? Alright, if I were in -30 centigrade, I would literally be a, ice statue. I won't be able to move. Damn, I can't even picture -30. When you are in really cold temperature, your entire mind process slows down incredibly. You can't think properly. And at that time, they have to survive like this. This is seriously horrible time for all this French army, man.
Put
-30, damn.
Around their fires. At dawn on the 29th, with the army leaving and the Russians approaching, thousands of stragglers surged in panic towards the bridges. Dozens were crushed underfoot. Others fell or were pushed into the water, or tried to swim, which was certain death. When French engineers burned the bridges at 9 a.m, thousands were cut off and left to the mercy of the advancing Cossacks. Some became prisoners. Others were simply put out of their misery.
God damn, that is so horrible.
Since the retreat began 43 days earlier, the Grande Armée had marched nearly...
I think this Kutuzov blocked him here. That mattered a lot. That slowed him down a lot. The winter arrived before he thought it would, and it killed a lot of his army. If that didn't happen and he was a bit more far behind, a lot of things would have changed. The Russian army couldn't have, and intercept them like that. And lots of people would have died. They would have held out in Smolensk. But that stop here alone screwed things over. But that's the kind of point, isn't it? That was Russians' plan.
500 miles under constant attack, starved, exhausted, and for the last 23 days in lethal sub-zero temperatures.
God damn,
without proper clothing or shelter. In that time, the fighting strength of the Grande Armée had been reduced from around 124,000 men to 20,000.
Oh God, that's
with as many stragglers still following the army.
That's so
As the
low.
retreat continued to Vilna, the weather turned even worse, the temperatures falling to -37 degrees centigrade. The Russian armies at least now held back, leaving the winter, the Cossacks...
Wait a minute, so right now in Russia winters are -40 degrees? That is insane. How are any Russian alive, man? This low temperature?
And Russian peasants to finish off the invaders. On the 5th of December, Napoleon left the army, travelling incognito across Europe at breakneck speed, and reaching Paris in just 13 days.
He hauled ass.
Naturally, English satirists capitalized on Napoleon.
They are gonna have a field day right there. Man, I can't imagine Napoleon. He goes back to France and people like me. Now what the? There was 500,000 of you. What happened? Nothing. Tried to invade Russia. In the end, we lost and everybody's dead. Well, right then.
Seeming to abandon his defeated army. And many soldiers did regard it as an act of betrayal. But his generals supported his decision to leave. There'd already been one attempted coup against Napoleon in Paris. and there was much work to be done to rebuild the army and reassure France's allies. On the 9th of December, 51 days after the retreat began, around 20,000 ragged survivors of the Grande Armée began crossing the Niemen River back into friendly Polish territory. According to legend, Marshal Ney was the last man across.
Damn, that's devastating.
Napoleon's invasion of Russia had proved to be one of the greatest military disasters in history.
Seriously though.
He had made fatal miscalculations about geography, logistics, and above all, Russia's political and strategic response to his invasion. These blunders cost his empire around 500,000 men,
God
as
damn,
well as a
look at the
250,000
number.
horses and 1,000 cannon. Put another way, of every 12 men who marched into Russia with the Grande Armée, one was killed in action or died of wounds. 2 were taken prisoner, one of whom died in captivity. 7 died from disease or the effects of climate. Just 2 returned alive.
That is ridiculous. After what he said, 12? Oh, out of 12, 7 died by climate and disease. That is so stupid. It's ridiculous to think about. What the hell was Napoleon thinking? Didn't he realize the winter would come and I'm in Russia? I'm in Moscow, it would hit near minus 40 degrees. I think he was so full of himself. He thought, you know what? I'm gonna be so deep inside Russia that Alexander soon would, give up. But Alexander, he's not stupid. He know the winter is coming and French can't handle that. So he would just wait out. This was seriously stupid by Napoleon's part, man. Seriously.
Contrary to myth, many more soldiers had died in the summer advance from heat, typhus and dysentery than were lost in the winter retreat. Russian military casualties were estimated at 150,000, and a huge but unknown number of civilian deaths.
God damn.
The Russian campaign was a catastrophe for Napoleon. Not just in lost troops and resources, but in damage to prestige and reputation.
Seriously.
That winter, all his enemies sensed weakness and prepared to join forces against him. But the Emperor wasn't going down without a fight. Back in Paris, he admitted to his ministers, "Fortune has dazzled me, gentlemen. I've let it lead me astray. Instead of following my plan, I went to Moscow. I thought I'd make peace there. I stayed too long. I've made a grave mistake, but I'll have the means to repair it." Thank you to all the Patreon supporters who make this series possible.
This was horrible. Damn. How many people had died simply by the winter. Majority of them died simply in the winter. Napoleon should have known that coming, man. This was so stupid. This is from past few, his invasion. Has been a trend. He was in Spain and decided, you know what, screw it, we're gonna attack Russia. He just took 500,000 people there, thinking number are number, there are more, we're gonna win. Didn't realize the winter is going to cut them down. This is so horrible. I'm just thinking in just military standpoint, but just the human standpoint. Damn. All those people who died. It's just ridiculous. They left their home country, went to Russia, all the civilians too, man. And they died in freezing cold temperature, by getting abandoned by their own army because their own army are running away in the freezing conditions. How horrible is that? People are trying to cross the pontoon, all the river and things, and getting drowned in the ice cold water. I started this video thinking Napoleon's going to be a heavyweight here. Napoleon's going to attack. Russians are still going to be seriously opposing party, but I didn't thought it would turn into some horror movie where Russians literally chase off Napoleon, bit by bit, like some monsters coming to eat them at night. This was serious. I've never seen something like this. All right, there are still videos left in the road to Leipzig, Battle of Nations, and then Endgame France, and there are still Battle of Waterloo. 3 or 4 parts. 4 parts are still remaining. Damn, this was seriously heavy though. Alright, if you like my reaction, please don't forget to like and subscribe.